Welcome to Just In Case. Case UK's podcast, where we choose to help build lives, not patients.
So my name is Russell Todd, podcast producer. I am in Pentrabach, just south of Merthyr Tydfil in the heart of the South Wales Valleys, and I have the very great pleasure of speaking with Ian Benbow. Welcome to the podcast, Ian. Welcome to your podcast, Ian.
Thank you, Russell. Thank you. Looking forward to it.
So I say your podcast. It's Case UK. I'm at the Case UK headquarters, as I said, in Pentrabach. What is Case UK? Who are Case UK?
That's the big question, that is, isn't it? Case UK started off as my recovery model, but Case UK now has become an amazing organisation that provides support to people to stay in work. It goes from counselling, physio, and just a whole supporting environment.
There's a couple of the team looking in as we're recording, because the idea is you're going to be taking this podcast forward. It's going to be a real kind of showcase of the work that you do, the people you work with, the organisations you collaborate with, and you will be taking this off on your own. I won't be needed eventually anymore, which is kind of how I like it in the longer term, building that capacity. But we wanted to start with the very first episode with yourself, because as you've just alluded to, because there is a journey there, isn't there?
There's a long journey, interesting journey. It was a challenging journey as well.
So a little bit more about yourself then. Before we get into the Case UK, how have you come to this sort of situation, other things you've been involved in? Because I know it's been a varied career.
Varied career, yeah. Well, way back, many years ago, I was heavily involved in sport, football. So I played for Hereford United. But I found myself, when I was at Hereford, just going through a lot of communities networks. And we had in our contract that we had to go and support community groups. And not many players done that, but I enjoyed it. So I said, when the opportunity come, and I got fed up of professional football and what it was, and I realised that I wasn't going to go to the top and be the next Ryan Giggs or Ronaldo or something else. I just thought I need something completely different. So I went into part-time football. I went to Telford, then I went to Merthyr where I met my wife. And I went into then voluntary work because I said I come out of football and nobody really took me seriously because I was a football player. I did have a life of a football player in some guys. And then when I tried to become serious, it was, is he really a support? Can he support? So I done nearly 12 months volunteering in the Oasis Drop-In Centre in Merthyr. That was life-changing for me in some ways because, as I said, you start to live and see how young people who were on the struggling side of life, how they coped. And then, by luck, I was doing some voluntary work in the youth service, and I was sat waiting for the youth club to open, and this guy walked past, and we just generally had a chat. Not realising he was the chairman of the Aberfan Community Project. And just said, if you're volunteering, would you like to have a part-time job? And that was completely changing my life. I spent best part of 14, 15 years working in the Aberfan community. Everybody knows about the Aberfan community, so there's a history there. My wife became the district nurse there. It became a whole family thing, living in the community. But I learned a complete passion for community regeneration stroke third sector organisations. See the value of it. And so went from there. I think we got to a stage where we managed to turn it over to £1 million turnover. We employed 40 people from the community. And when you think from a community of 2,500, that was substantial. And then I wanted something different. I thought I could go and change the world by going in and changing policy. So I joined local government, and I really enjoyed my time there, heavily involved in influencing what our local services were, how we commission out to the third sector rather than it all being done in-house. And it was something different that the local authority didn't historically do. It was a challenge because you're talking about two different cultural things, but on a positive, you used to see the third sector growing, the networks that were growing, we were seeing the positive outcomes for people, and that started to have an impact on the communities of Merthyr, which was amazing. And then, one of the biggest projects was the Bridges into Work project I put together initially, and then I worked in partnership with heads of the valley, local authorities, for the Bridges into Work project, which secured £50 million, something like that, of ESF invested into the valleys. And then I was diagnosed with a condition called hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, which in layman's terms, and then people associate it back to Fabrice Muamba and more recently Ericsson, is the adult sudden death syndrome. So I was diagnosed with that, and that was a big task because I was told it was hereditary, and I managed to then find out other stuff in my life that I didn't realise existed when tracking it all back. So I was then given a defib into my chest, so I had defib built into the infrastructure of my chest, purely as a preventative measure. Yeah, that was hard to take because it said you have a physical change. So when you go on holiday and you're out there and you've got this lump in your chest, and you can see everybody, what's that on there? So I had it and I was does it really matter? I've got this, or should I have it? And then probably 5-6 months after having it, I was in a meeting in the council and I went to stand up. Next thing, I just hit the table. Never felt it. It was on the next thing I sat up, and there was somebody who I was in a meeting with was just looking at me, and she was holding the table going, oh my God. So obviously the defib had kicked in and sort of maintained my heartbeat. I sat back up, but it hadn't regulated my heart properly.
Right.
So as I stood up, I had a wall behind me, is about 3 foot away, and it hit me again. Well, I felt the second one. It literally went straight to the wall, the one wall, and I flew back over the chair and hit the wall behind me.
Wow.
And it was one of those things you're going, wow, it's it took me back to the doctor side, where the doctor went, tell you what, said, if it goes off once, sit there 5 minutes and then just work your way back to the hospital, get in touch with us and we'll just check. If it hits twice, ring 999. I was stuck in a room with a woman that was going, I can't answer the phone, I can't ring the phone, because she was just literally stuck there. So, I had a shock, but I think she had a greater shock than I did, because I think it was there as on there. So I went off to hospital and come back. I was actually off for 3 days. I then went back to work because I thought that's the way I was and that's why I was brought up. And it came to a point where that was probably the biggest mistake I ever done. And I've come to learn a quote that the body keeps the score, and that's exactly what it done for me, because it said I thought I'd learned within my day job what mental health was. And I had this perception because I researched it and I was involved in developing programs for it. But what I actually found, it was 10 times worse. I just could not leave the house. And when I did leave the house, I'd go into somewhere like Tesco's or Asda's, and I'd then go, I'm going to faint. I'm going down. So my wife got to a situation where she carried stuff around and started learning techniques where if you're in Tesco's or Asda's, grab the smallest item you can find and read the small print. And it totally refocused the mind to get the anxiety down to a level where it allowed you to walk out. And like I said, a lot of the work, Bridges into Work, for instance, was primarily based on learning through the outdoors. And it was all about how individuals with mental health would recover that. We used it as part of the day job. I found myself then starting to use it for my own recovery. So Brecon Beacons, Aberdare Country Park, and I just spent days walking around there trying to get my mind back into action, and that it was a challenging time. And
so we're 2024 now, talking.
Yeah.
How far back are we going in terms of years?
This was back 2014.
Okay.
As part of that process. So I suppose the event happened in 2012. Then the recovery and all the issues that was going on started from there. So when I started getting to the point, I need to get recovered here. About 2014, I was still employed at the time through my recovery, but I've come across, and I've also coined a phrase of a quick door syndrome, which is an interesting one, because I said I always used to think, and that's the kind of person that I'd like to think I've been brought up in a family that cares, and I used to have, when I wanted to go back into the working environment, or people didn't want to meet with me, just in case they had to witness what had been witnessed by this other member of staff, which had spread around the council. We were going through austerity measures, so it was a quick opportunity to get rid of people. The easy option for me, the quick door syndrome, was They didn't know how to deal with me with my mental health. They were going through austerity measures. Here, Ian, here's a lump sum. Off you go. And just go and enjoy life. And at that time, you know, when you're going through that, and any practitioner or anybody else would talk about your environment when you're going through it, without having the background knowledge of that at the time, I just needed to get out of that environment. And again, worst thing that I could have done, because I said I had a big lump sum of money. Great thing, yeah, this is all sorted. At 45, door opens, I walk out with this money, close the door, and then all of a sudden I've gone, what do I do next? And it was time, because I said that I'd become totally isolated then. So members of the staff that I worked with didn't really engage me because they didn't know what to say. The dynamics within the authority had changed. New managers coming in, and there was we got loyalty to this manager now, so I lost everything. I lost my networks. So then I had to start finding stuff again. I had to rebuild my life again. So I said, round and round, Aberdare Park, Brecon Beacons, and then I got to a point of I'm ready. I need to find work, because I said this isn't going to last. And like I said, I had 3 daughters that wanted to go to university. I had a wife and a mortgage, and I just wanted to be there. And it was a point where I was thinking, what's the point? So I started looking for work, and I was applying for jobs, and taking in consideration that I was integral to the Bridges into Work project that generated £50 million for the Heads of the Valley region. I was having people offering me work to do consultative work, but nobody would employ me. So I became unemployable overnight. And after 6-7 months of doing some consultative work for the likes of Capita and CTech Plus in the south of England, they wanted me because they wanted me to link into the Welsh infrastructure. So I saw what they were doing, but it wasn't because it wanted me. They just wanted the Welsh infrastructure. And I just thought, I need to change my environment. I need to change it, and I need to change it to environment. So that's when, in 2016, I was knocking down a shed in the garden with my son-in-law, and I went, I'm going to set up my own business just to support and go back to what I know. So it took me back to a point where, when I focused on it, really what I was going to do was go and just provide support to third sector organisations. That was what was going to drive me. But also, I was accessing or trying to access support, and I was finding out that I couldn't have access to that support because I was being engaged by someone else. And I was totally distraught, really, when you come to that, because I used to commission services, and I believed we'd done a lot of collaboration services. And the reality, when I actually got to the other side of the fence, I couldn't access those services. So that was the whole drive then for Case UK, is to create an opportunity for people that are struggling or at the risk of falling out of work, to have that support to guide them through, rather than just opening that door and letting them walk out and sit there. We set it up. Case UK was the Care and Support Enterprises. So it looks at care for people and support people. And it's whatever it needs to take. And that's the whole ethos. There's not one, this is the service. It's all kinds of services. And it says Care and Support Enterprises, but it actually stands for Catherine, Ashley, Sophie and Emily, which is my wife and 3 daughters. That was the purpose to live in when I went back to that. And like I said, it evolved to start doing activities. So we first started off when we were doing activities where I was providing support to third sector organisations. And I know I worked with you sometime way back on some of that. But that was my start of my recovery. I know since we started that, we've generated £3.5 million of funding, not direct for us, but we supported charities to apply for that funding and put that back in the infrastructure. One being the Oasis Community Church in Aberdare, where they've totally refurbished the community building. From that point, I started looking at different models of support and what I didn't get, which then informed the services that we now deliver today. And like I said, is that I went to counselling when I first went through this process. Counselling was good to talk. But when I left, as I said before, I've got a wife, children, mortgage. Nobody was helping me sort that out. And I said, so it was good to talk, but I still needed help. So the whole ethos behind us and the services that we provide now is trying to develop support services of individuals that help you go round and combat issues that you face on a day-to-day basis that would be the barrier for you maintaining and staying in work. And many people see that potentially as an activity that's seen and managed through the third sector and charitable sector. The services we provide are no different. The difference is that I set this up because I couldn't get employed by any of the charities and third sectors. So I refer ourselves to a social impact company.
Okay.
So the whole ethos of driving of Case UK is actually to demonstrate impact on social communities, including individuals. So we've developed the range of services, and we informed a national programme of access to work delivery with a company called Ingeus, an Australian company that came over to tender for work. They reached out to us, well, me at the time, and said, would you contribute towards the thinking process? They put that part together, and they were successful with the access to work mental health support service tender. They came back then and said, well, would you like to deliver? Naively, I said, yeah, we do it. And I said, at the time I had Dan, who was a young lad that was on placement with me. Dan had his own problems. So we actually started to become a bit of a magnet for individuals that face challenges in life. And I said, yeah, we'll do Merthyr and Aberdare and Rhondda Cynon Taf, because I know those areas. And that's like, they came back to me and went, no, we need somebody to cover the whole of Wales. And I said, how am I going to do that? So we then said, yep, we'll do that. The money that I had from the council, I just ploughed into employing staff. And they also come back then and said, we want you to look at developing an innovative approach for out-of-hour service, because it needs to be bilingual.
Yeah.
So I said, yeah. And he said, if you can come up with something within 7 days, we will commission off you. Well, I don't think it took 7 days. It took us 4 days, I think it was. We had a link to Chrissy, who was the next employee that jumped on the bandwagon with us. And Chrissy was open to working from home, and therefore off that basis we bought all the equipment, gave it to Chrissy. She set up the whole contact centre, and we run a UK-based contact centre from Chrissy's house as a starting point. It was bilingual, and it started in the evening from 6 till 10:30 at night. That's now substantially grown, and I think there's 12 now that operate in that setting. And we've had other organisations now come to us saying, would you be interested in delivering contact centre support work? It acts as an engagement tool for us, but also a referral mechanism into our mainstream programmes. People who ring up, unemployed, employed, they'll generally do an assessment online through the telephone, and then refer them into the appropriate support. So it's been a great engagement service for that. We then won contracts with Welsh Government for out-of-work service, which to provide unemployed people with mentoring support. So we got individuals with lived experience, and literally they're going around. And I remember I was actually in the View Cinema in Treforest, and I was sat there having a meeting with someone, and these two individuals walked in, and I thought, I know those. And they were two of our members of staff, and they were there. And I actually was sat in seats opposite, or just back to back, so they couldn't see my face, but I could hear. And I was blown away by what they actually done, because it's actually the impact it had on people's lives. They had one individual there, two of them there, and they were talking through real complex issues on their life, but they were coming up with solutions. And I said, that's what I didn't have when I was going through mine. So sit there listening to it was amazing. Then we got the in-work service, the individuals who are potentially struggling, whether it's for physical issues or for mental health issues, can access 6 sessions of counselling or 6 sessions of physiotherapy as a complete package to help them. So really, when you think about it, the Able Futures project that we got through Ingeus and the DWP, that provides a 9 months one-to-one support session. It's not counselling, it's managed by counsellors, but the aim is to look at all the issues around life.
Yeah.
And then anybody that's identified as needing counselling with trauma, we can now provide access to that. Or anybody that's struggling in work because of physical, then they get referred straight off that. So technically it's an all-encompassing wellbeing service.
It's interesting you used the word trauma there, because we hear a lot about that increasingly, about trauma-informed practice, maybe within a social services setting or educational setting. But why should it be confined to just those? So trauma-informed employability services.
Exactly.
It makes so much obvious sense, but it's such the dial is having to be turned to such an extent in the context of something like employability, that it hasn't happened to date, and it needs people like yourself, organisations like CASE, to continue to turn that dial to make it a bit more mainstream then.
Yeah, and I think mental health generally is becoming more open as discussions.
Yeah.
But I think, though, there's still that issue of we want to put it in a box somewhere so it's easy and we can measure that, or it's linked to that session and it's linked to that funding. And like I said, one of the biggest lessons that I learned when I went into local government was all around the team around the family. And it was about, you've got a child that's going through, you'll have an educationalist focusing on that child. And actually the impact that child has from the environment he's working in the family. And I said, in my case, it was me and my daughters within the higher education strokes sector. And I said the impact of what was happening with me was having an impact on them. And therefore, you've got to see it in the bigger picture. I think that, the more we start seeing that, the better we come and actually helping communities to become resilient. And resilient's an interesting word, and I can debate that all day.
And so could I, but we won't for the purposes of this. So you've touched on a couple of moments there that have made you sort of feel proud. There is a danger. I commend you, and I'm humbled by your honesty in what you're explaining here in terms of your journey, your experiences. And you've talked about there being a greater sort of openness about talking about mental health, which I think that is the case. I mean, you find it, for example, in football, increasingly these days when people retire, there's much more openness now about what people are going through, that massive kind of change in their life, if you like. And it's not just football or sport. There's still an element of it being a bit, perhaps, this is a bit heavy, Humour can be used. We can try to make things a little bit more, bring a bit more levity into things. You talk about, fainting in Tesco and things like that. But what helps you kind of maintain a positive environment and a positive culture around these topics, if it is getting a little bit heavy, if it does, and sometimes it needs to, because it deserves to. If we're talking about, I don't know, suicidal idealisation or self-harm, all of these things that are all on that spectrum of mental health. How do we bring a bit more levity into things as well?
It's an interesting one because it affects so many different people in so many different ways.
Absolutely.
And I think for me, we can only go back to the point of we as individuals and our organisations, we manage our own environment. And therefore, the only one really that can, when you really get to the crux of addressing that environment, is you. And therefore, like I said, I own my own environment now. It might be linked into work, but I have a choice. And that's what, for us, is making sure that people access the choices. I got to say, because you said a bit of it's got to be funny. And I actually went to, last Christmas, there was the Heads of the Valley construction company. They had a whole day of all the construction workers coming in. So I'm there with one of our VRCs, Alan, to go into a presentation, and there's like 400 construction workers on there. I actually got dressed in the dark, and I'm walking across, and Alan says, "What shoes are you wearing?" And I had one black shoe and one brown shoe. Right. And it wasn't just it wasn't a dark brown shoe, it was a really light brown shoe. And I can remember just walking in and I'm thinking, oh my God, do I hide this? And I'm thinking, I'll just put my feet under the seat, but then I've got to go out and stand on the stage. So I just sat there and I just went, do you know, it's good to be different. And all the people in it, because you could see their eyes was there. It's good to be different.
Yeah.
That, for me, is how I keep it real. It's good to be different, but also to accept that there are things on there. I also live a life of enjoy life and look at it from a positive perspective. If somebody's done you wrong, you can't hold it, because the only person it's going to affect is you. So therefore, I try to switch off that. I might have a bad day, and therefore I push it back over there, and then the following day it is what it is, let's get on with something else. Let's look at the positive side of things. that's taken a long time to get there.
I was going to say, so to what extent is that something that you've learned because of what you've gone through and since you've gone through it, or was that maybe something that was maybe the raw materials of that response and that approach were there before?
No, it was never there before.
Right.
Never. If people knew me from before, I would have shot from the hip. I saw something, I'm going to open my mouth and I was going to say it. And when I was in football, when I was playing football, somebody said something that you look at row 49, that's where they're going, sort of thing. But now completely different. I think the impact of what had happened to me and the thoughts that happened, I now look at life in a different way. I remember at Christmas time, we were having Christmas dinner, and I can only explain that it was like a film. I just felt as if I floated above my table and I was looking down on my table. I was at the end and I was eating. But then I had this vision of me floating over, looking down on my wife and my kids, laughing and joking and thinking, this is Christmas without me.
Wow.
And then I thought, let's enjoy it when we're here. And I suppose that's where it changed. I get frustrated, I get challenged, but like I said, whatever happens, I ain't going to hold personal stuff with people. It's not worth it. Move on. And the old adage, life's too short. It is too short. But until something like this happens to you, everybody thinks they're there and they're going to be there forever.
You're listening to the Just In Case podcast. If you've got any suggestions for future themes, please get in touch. Now, back to the podcast.
So, where does a podcast fit in with all of this? Why are we here today? And we'll touch on what else is in the pipeline. But where does this medium fit in with all of this?
This is part of sharing, educating others, providing access to know what's out there. It just encourages people to talk. Because as I said, there's individuals out there that are going through this, hopefully come across something similar to this. Doesn't have to be ours. I just hope there's more and more of it. And they go, yeah, I need to go and speak to somebody on there. I need help. Turn up to our door and get the help, and then happy days. But also celebrate. This is not all about doom and gloom, as you mentioned. This is about us celebrating as well. I'm sat here, and I'm not sat here, even though it's sometimes when I listen to myself on this, it's a sad state of affairs. But I also sit back and I go, we've actually done all right. We've done well. And I look around the room that I work with and I see people enjoying themselves. And I see people that have come through. I think at least 50% of our workforce has gone through mental health issues of some sort or physical health issues. And I see them laughing in work. And that's an interesting one for me. The podcast, let's share it. And let's share it in a fun way. We're going to have gloomy talks, as you said. I love listening to them in other venues, whether it's football or whatever else. But what I want to do is I want to make it fun. I don't want it to get to a drone and they say, it's PTSD this week, happy days. It's more about what actually is PTSD and how can I get over what I need to do to improve my life.
Yeah. And that sense of like overcoming adversity, it's a type of story that's very innate in us. We do respond to that. It's what so many films are about. This format is quite good. And as I say to lots of people, we said it just before we started, they can be very solitary, dare I say, intimate experiences. People tend to listen to podcasts on their own. They don't listen to them with the whole family or invite their friends around to come and listen to them in the way that you would with an old vinyl LP back in the day or a CD or something. It tends to be a solitary experience, walking the dog, on the treadmill, on the commute to work. So it's an opportunity to reach people very effectively. Radio always has done it as well, of course, and it's a variation on that medium. So looking forward to bringing more of these types of conversations to people. You mentioned PTSD. Can we give a flavour to some of the other themes that we've got coming up?
We've got John and Byron, who both ex-professional rugby players. Byron recently came out of the Welsh Rugby Union. They're coming here I think it's going to be more on a Smith and Jones kind of debate and discussion relating to stress and anxiety and how to manage that and how it's impacted in sport, which I'm looking forward to that because I said that hits me as far as where I'm at. Self-care is being led by Sandy. She's actually a mental health nurse that we've employed and lives in Manchester. She's an amazing individual. She's gone through different challenges herself, but when she's joined us, she's brought substantial experience that's informed our working practices. And we got burnout as far as one of the podcasts, and that's going to be facilitated by a consultant spinal surgeon who we've got as an advisory capacity to Case UK. And I'm looking forward to that because there's always this perception about consultants and the NHS and that lot, and there's a big challenge and they want to do their private surgeries and that lot. We've managed to find a consultant that actually has amazing social values, and I think that he wants to share his experiences and knowledge as a social prescriber.
Yeah. Anxiety is down there, I see. This is some work that we were preparing as a team beforehand. So we're referring to our props. That's something that crept up on me a few years ago. Nothing I'd ever dealt with before, experienced before, and just out of nowhere like that. So yeah, that's an issue close to my heart, and my lived experience, a phrase we've used a couple of times. Aiming to be sort of monthly, give or take.
Looking monthly. I'd like to think, hopefully further down the line, that we can do it video as well as the oral.
Yeah.
Because I think sometimes it's the interaction, and I enjoy that, and I suppose my background when I was at school, I wasn't the most academic. I think I stopped going to school when I was 14, I got to be honest. But what I do like is I learn through visual as much as I do through sound. So my recovery has always been based on sound, but for enjoyment and fun as well, I like to watch on that basis.
And it will be available on all main principal sort of podcast platforms. If people are listening to this first episode thinking, well, and they may know you, may be familiar with part of the story perhaps, or think, well, I recognise the name, or I've seen the branding of Case UK, is there an ask of people? Can they get involved? Can they make suggestions? Can they be guests? Is there anything you want people to do off listening to this? All of the above. Okay. I think all of the above is the more people we get involved in it, great. I know that we've got Andrew from Traitors, was on the recent TV pro. He's coming in to share his discussions on PTSD. That was off the back of a discussion. But yeah, all of the above, because I said the more people we get in to make it interesting. I don't want it to be just droning on about a specific subject. It's got to have some sort of quality to it. People want to volunteer with us, great. If people want to then just send it out to wherever they send it out to, because I said I guarantee when you're in a meeting and whatever else, there could be 10 people in that meeting. There's going to be at least 6 or 7 of those individuals have gone through some form of issues. I'd like to say the day that I went up to meet all those construction workers, my end message left to them was, we've come here today and I've shared my story, and I've said that here is access to support if you need it. I said, you might be having a laugh and thinking it's a bit of a joke, great, but as long as you leave here today knowing that if something happens to me that you're not aware of, you know where to go. And that's exactly the same. That's the biggest thing for me, is there is an avenue to address anxiety. There are practices to work with, and the key part is just getting that message out there so when it happens to someone, they know where to go. Yeah. So plug for websites, social media, emails. Yes, we got a website, www.caseuk.co.uk. It is on Facebook, and we are on X as well, and it's Case UK on X, so it's on there. Yeah. LinkedIn as well, I think. Yes, LinkedIn. There is LinkedIn. I've got my personal LinkedIn, but there is also a LinkedIn page that comes off that, which is linked to Case UK. So we've heard a lot about the history and what's run up to setting it up, and what you've gone through and experienced. How about a quick glimpse into the future then? Is it all just about services around mental health and well-being, physical well-being? Is there anything else going on in the Case UK empire, dare I say? Empire, I wish, but no. I think that we have a couple of developments that are in train. One of the first participants that ever come through our programme, we'd supported them to get involved in self-employment. That has evolved to a certain degree, and we set up a company in partnership with that individual. His name is Gareth,
And what we done was we invested some of the surpluses that we generated from the first 4 years into setting up Case Cafe, which now Case UK owns 50%. Then we've got one of the employees owns 10% and Gareth owns 40%. So on the basis that, it's great for me to have seen that we could help an individual set up. And that's a mobile coffee van, which we now have our own coffee brand, and it's sourced back to fair trade, and it can be tracked all the way back to a farm in Brazil. And the most exciting part is that we've just finalised all the franchise agreements. So we've got all the supply chain now for van conversions, links to finance, and our first franchise is in the process of being sold, and that's going to be wheeled out. So that was a mobile coffee van that goes round and engages businesses, sells coffee, and on some occasions that we take it to businesses and give away free coffee to encourage people to come out and talk around a van. So it's a multi-faceted approach of engagement out in the community. We could take the van to rural communities, where they haven't got much, but also unemployed people. If they're unemployed, we're creating an opportunity for them to do it. Now, we've also had meetings with Cerebral Palsy Cymru. Their board of directors met yesterday, so they want to come down now and have a chat about how they can adopt the Case Cafe franchise as a funding strategy for Cerebral Palsy Cymru.
Right.
So, and that was always the ethos behind the first part was, we got Costa Coffee and we've got all that sort of stuff that goes on and they make money. Why can't we create a franchise that actually enables charities to make money? There's still the shops that go on that charities use, but they need to diversify, this is an opportunity for them to diversify. So that one is a really successful story, and another success has been that when I was in local government, one of the biggest things that we needed to do was demonstrate impact, and I came across a group of people that were looking at measuring well-being from an individual's perspective, and they were Red Dot 365 as a company, and it was a startup company that they were developing it at night time through their day job, above and beyond their day jobs. So I think they were struggling to chase and get the task completed. So again, one of the things that I saw on there was an opportunity, because I said, often we do assessments on people and say, oh yeah, they're at this level or they're at that level. This process is all about an individual assessing themselves.
Okay.
And I used to get in the discussion, we mentioned resilience earlier on, and it's, that community needs to be resilient. I used to argue with some of the communities I worked in that they are already resilient. They might have a different way of generating money, but it's about the value base. And I said, this is what we're looking for, is that if somebody feels happy in life, somebody feels comfortable on that, why do we judge them to be in poverty?
Yeah.
And so this is where I was looking at, and we came across the Red Dot software. It was a little bit clunky, but between having some lived experience and expertise in other areas, I think we've made it to get to a point where it's actually now becoming a real product that's going to change the whole approach of occupational health with small and medium-sized enterprises.
Wow.
We managed to secure a grant to do research, and we just went down to the Department of Health this week, where we presented to the Minister of Employment and the Minister of Health and Social Care. And the key findings that we found from our research, and we had a 2-minute pitch, and the 2-minute pitch was, through our research, employees don't trust, in general, occupational health provision that comes direct from employers, because they always question there's an issue behind it. Small and medium-sized enterprises don't have the resources to fund it. Often, the guys that I spoke to when I was going through some of this research was, I'm worrying about how I pay the VAT, or I'm worried about how I pay the PAYE, let alone worry about how I'm going to pay something that's over there. So the SME side of things is a big challenge. And then we went to a lot of occupational health providers, and what they've said is that the market for SMEs is not financially viable for them, so therefore they don't market it. So what we're actually saying when we win that research is at least 24% of our working population have no access to any occupational health support because they work in the SME. The occupational health providers don't see it as financially viable. So we've looked at that and how we can adopt the red dot system, and we're just on the fringes of finalising the details of creating the equivalent to Just Eat, where we'll have a Just Eat wellbeing app where you interact people with employers and then employers with occupational health providers. Once they've registered on it, they're not marketing, they are there. And then somebody's asking for help, it will sift itself out based on their own personal assessments. And that's exciting.
Mm. Coffee, software.
Yes. So, moving on to the future. The future is an interesting one for me. As I said, it's at the beginning, at the start, this was just a job because I couldn't find a job. We've had a development day where we brought all our workforce to the table to look at future. And we were approached, or I was approached, to sell a company for £1 million. Now, taking that into consideration, well, what I've gone through, it was one of those. I said, yeah, I'm interested in that because this is my chance to secure. I'd gone from losing a job, lost my pension, lost all my infrastructure, to a point where somebody was going to give me £1 million for a company. And we sat down, having a chat with them, and they said, what we want to do is we want to have 70% share in your company. We want you to keep 30%. We want you to drive it for the next 3 years, and then we'll work out how we integrate your organisation into ours. And I said, well, what does that mean? And they went, well, let's use one example. You've got one individual that focuses on marketing and social media and all that. They can be integrated into our corporate marketing team. Now, taking into consideration, 50% of individuals in this organisation struggle within a traditional working environment. I would guarantee you within 6 months, most of those people would have been offloaded by a corporate organisation. Mm. And the success that we've got with Case UK has been off the back of those individuals. Mm. So I pulled the plug on it, and I went back and I needed to look at it, and there was a moral issue for me because the money looked good. And I went to speak to a company called Educate and a guy called Grant Santos. And he said, have you not thought about an EOT? And I'd heard about it, but I hadn't really gone into it. And you'd have thought I'd have known through my background of third sector organisations. So I looked into it, and yeah, the actual way forward for me, it was quite easy then, is that the 70% of shares that we were looking at, I'm currently in the process of transferring over to the workforce. So we will move that to that with a long-term strategy then that it becomes a wholly owned trust.
Wow. Living those values that you've talked
Yes.
about all the way through this.
Yeah.
I think we've come to the end of this episode, Ian. We could talk for a lot longer, I'm sure, but I think we've given a glimpse into the future, and I commend you, and I'm humbled by your honesty and your openness and what you've brought to the table into this discussion as well. And I can only imagine similarly future episodes will be equally honest and frank as well. The next episode is covering PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. You touched on him earlier, Andrew from Traitors. Andrew Jenkins, to give him his full name. Byron will be joining us for that conversation, as will Chrissy from the team. Ian, I've loved it. I'm looking forward to getting involved. I've loved being involved to date. We were talking about this a while back, actually, so
Yes,
it's great
we
that
did.
it comes to fruition. Brilliant to be in the offices again. I remember when it was just you and Dan
Yes.
as well, coming along a few years back. So yeah, so great to see where it's at. And thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Case UK's podcast, Just in Case. Please make sure that you subscribe to this podcast in your preferred podcast app. That way you'll never miss a future episode. And be sure to follow us on social media. Check out our website, www.case-uk.co.uk. And don't forget, we're here for you just in case.
Blue sky, sweet and fresh water.